My parents charged $99,000 to my Amex while I was at work. Mom called me laughing from Hawaii. We know your social security number. We raised you. Then I found out they'd already tried opening a second card in my name. 6:12 p.m. Raining in Seattle, the kind of steady gray drizzle that never quite becomes a real storm. I'd just left work when Mom's name lit up my phone screen, her contact photo. A picture from 3 Christmases ago, all of us smiling, glowing against the wet pavement. I almost let it ring out. Old habits made me answer instead. She was already laughing before I'd even said hello, a bright, easy sound that, in any other context, would have made me smile too. Are you sitting down? Mom, I'm leaving work. What do you need? I asked, shifting my bag to my other shoulder, already scanning the street for a break in traffic. Oh, sweetheart, I don't need anything now. Every dollar is gone. Hawaii is expensive, but your sister finally got the trip she deserved. I stopped walking, right there on the sidewalk, rain soaking through my shoulder where my umbrella had drifted sideways. What are you talking about? Your American Express Gold Card, she said, calm as a woman reading off a grocery list, each word landing with the same unbothered rhythm she might use to describe the weather. $99,000, flights, hotel, shopping. We know your birthday. We know your social security number. We raised you. I couldn't breathe for a second, standing there in the rain, cars hissing past on the wet street. That card wasn't extra money sitting around for emergencies. It ran my business, vendor payments, software subscriptions, client deposits I processed and reimbursed on a rolling basis. The entire operational backbone of a company I'd spent 6 years building from a single laptop and a shared desk. This wasn't family drama dressed up as a phone call. This was, in every real sense, an emergency. I opened the Amex app right there on the sidewalk, hands shaking too badly to type my password correctly on the first try, rain dripping off the edge of my phone case and onto the screen. First-class tickets, oceanfront rooms at a resort I recognized from a magazine spread I'd once idly bookmarked myself years ago, thinking someday. Designer stores, one after another, names I recognized from windows I'd never once walked into, spa packages, a luxury rental car, resort charges, again and again, each one landing like a small, separate blow, the total climbing faster than I could fully process each individual line. You committed fraud, I said, my voice barely audible over the rain hammering steadily against my umbrella, which I'd finally righted with my free hand. Mom laughed harder, the sound crackling slightly over the phone's speaker. Fraud is such an ugly word. We're family. Dad muttered something in the background, indistinct except for the phrase, stop being dramatic. My sister Ashley squealed, somewhere near the phone. Ask her if she saw the purse! $99,000. Not for food, not for medicine, not for any emergency a reasonable person could name. Not $1 of it spent on anything that resembled need. For Ashley. For the daughter they'd always loved showing off. At every dinner, every holiday, every family photo arranged so she stood front and center. I need to back up, because that phone call on a rainy Seattle sidewalk wasn't the beginning of anything. It was the end of a pattern I'd spent nearly a decade quietly absorbing without ever fully naming it out loud. My name is Emily Caro. I'm 31 years old, and I run a small marketing consultancy out of a shared office space in Seattle's SoDo neighborhood. 5 employees, a handful of steady clients, the kind of business that runs on careful cash flow management rather than any real cushion. I've been the responsible one in my family for as long as I can remember, a role nobody ever formally assigned, but that settled onto me sometime around my 20th birthday and never once left, the way a piece of furniture eventually just becomes part of a room's permanent layout. My mother, Diane, has always had a particular gift for reframing any uncomfortable request as an obvious, almost self-evident kindness. The kind of woman who could ask you for $400 and somehow leave you feeling grateful for the opportunity to give it. My father, Gerald, worked in regional sales for most of his career, laid off twice in the past decade, each time leaning on me to bridge the gap just until the next thing comes through. My sister, Ashley, 27, has never held a job longer than 14 months, drifting between retail positions and half-finished certificate programs, always with some version of a plan that never quite materialized, always somehow the center of whatever gravity our family generated at any given gathering. There was the Thanksgiving I paid for the entire dinner because hosting is expensive and you make good money, a sentence my mother delivered with the same breezy confidence she used for most requests. There was the time Dad borrowed $4,000 for a truck repair and never mentioned it again, like the debt had simply evaporated the moment the check cleared into his account. There was every single holiday where Ashley got the bigger gift, the nicer card, the proud toast raised in her honor, and I got a nod and a gentle reminder to help your sister out whenever she mentioned needing something. There was the graduation gift, my own graduate degree, where the family celebration somehow turned halfway through dinner into a conversation about Ashley's upcoming move and whether I could help cover her first month's rent. I told myself it was nothing unusual. For years, families have dynamics. Some children get more attention than others. That's simply how families work, and I didn't want to be the daughter who kept score. I didn't yet understand, driving home that evening with rain streaking down my windshield, that the pattern I'd spent a decade quietly excusing had just finally crossed into outright criminal territory. 18 months before that Hawaii phone call, my mother asked me for my social security number over a Sunday dinner, explaining it was for insurance paperwork related to a family policy she was updating, the request delivered casually between past passing the mashed potatoes and asking about my week. I gave it to her without much hesitation, the same automatic trust I'd extended 100 times before. I told myself it was nothing. Parents handle this kind of administrative paperwork for their adult children all the time, and I had no specific reason, at that point, to doubt her explanation. I even remember feeling, briefly, a small warmth at being included in what felt like ordinary family logistics, the kind of mundane trust I assumed most families extended to each other without a second thought. 3 weeks later, I noticed a hard credit inquiry on my report I couldn't account for, from a furniture retailer I'd never shopped with, flagged automatically by the credit monitoring service I used for my business. I called the company directly, and a representative confirmed an application had been submitted under my name and social security number, though it had ultimately been declined due to insufficient income verification on the application itself, a detail that struck me even then as strange, since my own income would have easily cleared any reasonable threshold. I asked my mother about it, carefully, over the phone. "Do you know anything about a furniture credit application in my name?" "That must be a mistake," she said too quickly. "Probably identity theft, sweetheart. You should be careful with your information online." I told myself one more time that it was nothing, a coincidence, or genuinely a stranger's attempt at fraud, unrelated to my own family. I let it go, though something in her voice that day, a specific too-fast quality to the reassurance, had lodged itself somewhere I couldn't quite reach yet. 8 months later, I learned, almost by accident, scrolling through Ashley's public social media during a slow lunch break, that she'd furnished her entire apartment with a matching living room, set from that exact furniture retailer, posted in a series of proud photos with a caption about, "Finally treating myself." I remember staring at the screen for a long moment, my sandwich going untouched, doing the math in my head between the furniture set's visible price tag and the timeline of that declined application. My stomach dropped, looking at those photos. I called her directly, my voice tighter than I intended. "Ashley, did you try to open a credit account using my social security number?" She didn't deny it outright. "It was just supposed to be a temporary thing, Em. I was going to pay it off before you even noticed. I ended up getting approved a different way anyway, so it doesn't even matter now. It doesn't even matter now." I remember that phrase specifically because it was the first moment I understood that Ashley genuinely didn't see anything wrong with what she'd attempted. Not embarrassment at getting caught, just mild irritation that the plan had needed adjusting. I brought it to my parents that same week, expecting, naively, that they'd be as alarmed as I was. Instead, my mother cried, saying I was tearing this family apart over furniture, and my father called me cruel for even raising my voice about it, though I hadn't, in fact, raised my voice at all. I'd simply stated the facts as calmly as I could manage while my hands shook under the kitchen table. I almost filed a police report that week. I sat with the non-emergency lines number typed into my phone for nearly 20 minutes before I closed the app entirely, telling myself again that it was nothing worth destroying my family over. A single failed application, caught and declined before any real damage occurred. Instead of filing that report, I started quietly saving proof. Screenshots, texts, bank records, voicemails, a folder on my laptop I named simply emergency. I didn't fully understand, saving those first few screenshots, that I was building a case file. I just knew, somewhere underneath the rationalization, that I needed a record of what was actually happening, even if I wasn't ready yet to act on it. 4 months before Hawaii, my father asked me, over a casual dinner at his and Mom's house, what credit limit my Amex Gold card carried. A question dressed up as idle curiosity about how these premium cards work, delivered with the same easy confidence he used for most things, sandwiched between a comment about the pot roast and a question about my drive over. I answered honestly, not thinking much of it at the time. "It's high enough for business expenses. Why do you ask?" "No reason," he said, already changing the subject to something about the Seahawks' upcoming schedule, the transition smooth enough that I didn't register in the moment how deliberately smooth it actually was. I told myself it was nothing. Fathers ask their adult children random questions about finances sometimes, out of genuine curiosity rather than calculation. I let it go, though I remember distinctly the specific, careful way he'd asked it, like a man gathering a piece of information he intended to use later, rather than simply making conversation, filing the number away the same methodical way I might file a client's budget ceiling before a proposal. I had no idea, at that dinner table, that I was answering the exact question that would determine, 4 months later, exactly how much damage my own parents believed they could safely charge to my name before anyone noticed. "Don't celebrate too soon," I told my mother, standing on that rain-soaked sidewalk, my voice steadier than I felt, cars still hissing past on the wet asphalt behind me. Mom snorted, the sound sharp and dismissive even through a poor connection. "What are you going to do, call the police on your own parents?" "No," I said quietly. "I'm going to handle this the smart way." She hung up before I could say anything else. I didn't go home that night. I sat on a cold concrete bench outside my own office building, laptop balanced on my knees, rain pattering against the awning above me, and got to work the way I'd trained myself to work through any crisis, methodically, one documented step at a time. 6:23 p.m. I downloaded the full transaction history directly from the Amex app, every charge timestamped and itemized. 6:31 p.m. I froze the card entirely through the app's security settings. 6:44 p.m. I called American Express directly and reported every single charge as unauthorized. Speaking with a fraud specialist named Devin Ruiz, who walked me through the initial claims process and confirmed a formal investigation would open immediately, given the scale of the charges. Devin asked me gently whether I felt safe, a question that caught me off guard enough that I had to sit with it a moment before answering honestly that I wasn't entirely sure yet. 7:08 p.m. The fraud case was officially open. Assigned a case number, I wrote directly onto my hand in blue pen because I didn't trust myself to remember it accurately in the state I was in. By 8:02 p.m., Ashley posted from what looked like an airport lounge, champagne glass raised, shopping bags stacked at her feet, captioned simply, "Some girls are just blessed." Mom commented underneath it within minutes, "You deserve the world, baby." I screenshotted that too, adding it to the growing folder, and then sent everything I had, the recorded call, the text messages, the old social security request, Ashley's failed credit application from 8 months earlier, straight to my attorney, a family and financial fraud specialist named Patricia Nolan, 20 years in practice, who I'd retained on a retainer basis 3 months earlier for unrelated business contract work, and now apparently desperately needed for something else entirely. I remember typing the message to her with genuine disbelief at my own situation, prefacing the whole thing with, "I know this isn't what you usually handle for me, but..." At 9:03 p.m., Patricia replied, "Do not warn them again. Let the process work." She followed it a minute later with a second message. "This is serious, Emily. I'm glad you called immediately. Keep documenting everything, including your own state of mind tonight. Timestamps, how you're feeling, what you observed. It all matters later." So I stayed silent, sitting on that cold bench, watching my own breath fog faintly in the evening chill, typing brief notes to myself in a fresh document every few minutes, the way Patricia had suggested, more to keep my hands busy than out of any real strategic clarity at that point. Then, at 10:14 p.m., another message arrived from Patricia, and reading it changed the entire shape of the night. "They attempted a second card application using your social security number at 5:52 p.m. It was denied. Preserve everything." I read it 3 times, my hands finally, fully shaking on the laptop's cold metal edge, rain still coming down steadily against the awning above the bench. They hadn't stopped at charging one card to its absolute limit. While my mother was laughing from a beach and Ashley was posting champagne photos from an airport lounge, someone in that family had simultaneously attempted to open a second account entirely in my name, meaning the entire scheme hadn't been a single impulsive splurge at all, but something coordinated, timed, run in parallel while I was still standing on a sidewalk in the rain trying to understand what had already happened to the first card. That detail changed everything Patricia and I understood about intent. A single unauthorized use of a family card, however extreme, might have been argued in some desperate legal framing as a misunderstanding about implied permission. A second, deliberate application, submitted while the first fraud was actively unfolding, was something else entirely. Premeditated, documented, impossible to characterize as an innocent family miscommunication. I had, sitting on that bench with my case number still inked onto my hand, maybe a few hours before this either resolved into something manageable or spiraled into something none of us could fully control. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Not from cold, though the temperature had dropped enough that I could see my breath clearly under the streetlight. From the specific, bone-deep realization that the people who'd raised me had also, apparently, been actively calculating how much of my identity they could extract before the mechanism finally caught up with them. At 10:06 p.m., my phone rang again. Dad's name this time. I answered. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice carrying an edge I didn't recognize. "I told the truth," I said. "There are officers here." His voice shook, for the first time in my entire life that I could remember hearing it shake, a tremor I'd never once associated with the steady, unbothered man who'd raised me. Mom grabbed the phone from him, her voice sharp enough to cut through the static of the call. "You ungrateful little witch. Do you understand what you've done?" "Yes," I said. "I protected myself." Ashley sobbed somewhere in the background, her voice muffled and ragged. "Emily, please, tell them it was a mistake. Tell them we thought you said yes." "I never said yes." "But we're family," Ashley said, her voice thin and pleading through the phone. "Family doesn't forge a second application while the first one is still under investigation," I said, my voice finally completely steady, standing alone in my kitchen with the phone pressed hard against my ear. "Family doesn't laugh from a beach while it happens." Nobody on the other end of the line answered that. I could hear faintly the murmur of an officer's voice somewhere behind my mother, and the specific creak of what sounded like a screen door opening and closing. I looked around my own quiet kitchen, where I'd finally walked home to sometime after 11, cold tea I'd made hours earlier and never touched, a stack of unpaid vendor invoices sitting on the counter, waiting on a card that no longer existed, a life my family had always treated like something they could borrow freely, drain completely, and hand back to me damaged whenever it suited them. "Family," I said, "is not a password." The line went dead silent, the kind of silence that somehow carried more weight than any shouting had all night. Then, an officer's voice came through instead of my mother's. "Ma'am, are you safe where you are?" "Yes," I said, glancing around my quiet kitchen once more, at the cold tea and the unpaid invoices and the life I was only just beginning to understand I could finally rebuild on my own terms. "We may need a formal statement regarding the charges and the second application attempt." "I have everything everything ready, I told him. Screenshots, call logs, my attorney's contact information, the original credit inquiry from 18 months ago. All of it. A pause on the line. I can see that, he said. Detective Rosa Ibarra, 14 years with the Kirkland Police Department's Financial Crimes Division, took my formal statement 3 days later, walking through every document in Patricia's meticulously organized file. Exhibit A through Exhibit F, she called them by the end, cross-referencing the Amex fraud case number against the timeline Patricia and I had built together. She confirmed what Patricia had already suspected. The second application, submitted while the first fraud was under active investigation, elevated the case from a family financial dispute into formal identity theft charges, a felony in Washington state given the dollar amount involved. I've seen plenty of family fraud cases, Detective Ibarra told me, closing the folder after nearly 2 hours of careful review. But the parallel second application is what separates a genuine misunderstanding from a plan. Most families, even ones behaving badly, stop once they realize they've been caught. Yours didn't stop. Yours kept going in real time. She said it plainly, without drama. The same tone I imagined she reserved for facts that didn't need embellishing to land with their full weight. The criminal case took just over 8 months to resolve. My mother and father were both charged with identity theft and fraud. My mother pled guilty to a reduced charge in exchange for restitution and probation, while my father, whose direct involvement in the second application, Detective Ibarra's investigation, confirmed through phone records, received a harsher plea deal that included a suspended sentence contingent on full restitution and community service. Ashley was charged separately for her role in the original furniture credit attempt from the year before, once that older incident resurfaced during discovery, receiving a deferred prosecution agreement tied to a financial literacy course and restitution of her own. Detective Ibarra told me, near the end of the process, that cases involving a documented pattern like Ashley's furniture attempt rarely stayed buried once a larger investigation started pulling threads. American Express, once Devin Ruiz's fraud team completed their internal investigation, reversed every unauthorized charge and closed the compromised account, issuing me a new card number within 2 weeks. The restitution ordered through the criminal case, once fully paid, covered the remainder of what the fraud protection hadn't already absorbed. Patricia Nolan, throughout the entire process, kept a running file she eventually handed back to me at our final meeting. Exhibit A through Exhibit J, by that point, she told me, the largest personal fraud file she'd built in a case that never once involved a stranger. I haven't spoken to my parents since that October phone call. Ashley reached out once in the spring, a long message that read more like a request for forgiveness than an actual apology, framed almost entirely around how hard the past year had been for her, with barely a sentence acknowledging what any of it had cost me. I haven't responded, not out of cruelty, but because I genuinely don't yet know what an honest response would say, and Dr. Marsh, my own therapist, not to be confused with any professional from earlier in this account, has advised me gently that silence is a complete answer in itself, not a placeholder for a kinder one I owe anybody. I still run my consultancy. Business survived the 8 months of financial disruption, barely, through a combination of savings I'd never told anyone about, and a very patient landlord who agreed to a short deferred payment arrangement once I explained, in broad strokes, what was happening. I think some days that keeping that reserve secret was the first small act of self-protection I'd taken in years, without fully realizing what I was protecting myself from.